Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. The Russian company Gazprom says it will halt the supply of gas to Poland and Bulgaria from Wednesday. Both countries rely on Gazprom for most of their gas imports, but there has been uncertainty over the deals since Russia announced that its gas must be paid for in rubles from April. The Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki said his country's gas supplies would be secure.
We've received threats from the Russian Federation, from Gazprom, related to the method of payment. Poland is sticking to the arrangements, and perhaps Russia will try to punish Poland in this way. As I've said before, Poland has previously prepared to diversify gas supplies and to obtain gas from various directions. We'll be able to protect our economy and protect Poles against such a dramatic step by Russia.
The United Nations says Russia's President Vladimir Putin has agreed in principle to the UN and the Red Cross being involved in the evacuation of civilians from the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. The Russian president held talks with UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on Tuesday. President Putin said Russian humanitarian corridors had already proved successful, but the BBC's Russia editor Steve Rosenberg said his position on the war is unchanged.
There is no sign that the Kremlin leader is ready for peace. He continues to try to justify his actions, justify his so-called special military operation. The second thing is there is growing tension between Russia and the West. Today, Moscow accused Britain of trying to provoke Ukraine into attacking targets on Russian territory. And one of Mr. Putin's closest allies claimed that the actions of Western governments and the Ukrainian government would lead to the breakup of Ukraine into several states. That sounds like a warning or even a threat.
There has been heavy fighting in the eastern region of Ukraine, known as the Donbass, which borders Russia. The governor of Luhansk Oblast, Serhiy Haidai, confirmed that Ukraine has repelled 6 Russian attacks in the region in the past 24 hours. The former chief of the British Joint Command, General Sir Chris Deverell, told the BBC that a swift victory for either side there is unlikely.
A frozen conflict is very possible. To some significant degree, that's what's been the case prior to this February when the Russians invaded. There's been conflict and shelling and occasional incursions by both parties in the Donbass since the conflict there started in 2014. But it's been fairly static for years, and returning to that kind of frozen conflict is definitely possible.
Stock markets in the United States have fallen sharply, with the Nasdaq closing at its lowest level since December 2020. Analysts say investors are concerned that moves to combat rising inflation could lead to a recession. The economic consequences of the war in Ukraine are also fueling the fall. Elon Musk's pending takeover of Twitter is providing additional concern. World News from the BBC. Harvard University in the United States says 70 members of its staff owned slaves before the practice was abolished in the state of Massachusetts nearly 250 years ago. The finding follows an investigation into the institution's historical links to the transatlantic slave trade. A BBC investigation has found that dozens of unqualified people are working in Egypt's rapidly growing cosmetic surgery industry, endangering lives and leaving women scarred for life. Doctors say they have been struggling to cope with demand for procedures since Egypt began to promote itself as a destination for medical tourism in 2020. Egyptian law requires practitioners to be dermatologists or plastic surgeons. The authorities in Colombia say that 52 human rights activists and community leaders have been killed in the first 3 months of the year. That's an increase in violence compared with last year. Most of the victims are targeted because they clash with the interests of illegal armed groups, including drug trafficking gangs like the Gulf Clan. A samba group that highlighted prejudices against African Brazilian religions have been crowned as the champions of this year's Rio de Janeiro Carnival Parade. This is the first carnival parade to take place in Rio since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. Our Americas editor Leonardo Rocha reports.
12 samba schools representing different communities of the city competed at Rio Samba Drum for the top prize. The Grande Rio Samba School has won its first title with a song, costume and floats that pay tribute to Eshu, a Yoruba god revered by many African cultures and wrongly associated by many in Brazil with the devil. Most samba schools this year chose African themes and racism as the focus of their performances. They say the atmosphere of intolerance created by the government of President Jair Bolsonaro, who's closely linked to Christian evangelical groups, has led to a rise in attacks against Afro-Brazilian worship centers.
BBC News.